to campus in June and do kind of a really in-depth, kind of hands-on on all 4 of these subjects. So we'll do tours of the campus. Becky plans to take you down to the soil pit where the soils team practices, and you know they won regionals and they're on their way to nationals. So that's kind of cool. So she must know what she's doing if she's teaching them that well. But you can crawl into the soil pit, and there's not a lot to be able to do this time of year, so I thought this would be kind of a fun addition for those of you both here in the Lincoln area and outstate to be able to come to campus and learn. So we're going to get started. We're going to try Slido again. So those of you who have your devices, please go to slido.com and try and log in. The code number for this Slido is F684, and the first question should be on a sliding scale from 1 to 10, what is your current management plan? 1 being I don't have anything, and 10 being I have a lot. So
a spreadsheet by the hour.
No, this is not working. So. All right. So did everybody get in and see what was on there and all that kind of stuff? Yes, no, maybe. Still loading. All right. We will move on. So I'll let Kim start since I've been talking. I'm going to take a drink.
Okay, so you can hear me, yes, of course. All right. Out of greater Nebraska, you can hear me, I assume. So I've been doing landscape management, landscape design for decades. And the big piece of doing design right is starting with the management plan. We are emphasizing that in every single class that I teach on campus. We are emphasizing that in the revision of our curriculum, because that is where the mistakes are made in terms of frustration that people have with their landscapes once they are finally implemented. Is, gosh, now I've got it, but I didn't actually think about what's going to happen next. And this is not just public landscapes, it is private landscapes as well. It's easy, you know, you can make all the mistakes you want in your own landscape. It's not quite as much of an issue as it is if it's in front of the public or it's at a school, those kinds of things. We're encountering that more and more as school gardens get built, and oh, wait a minute, what happens in June, July, and August when there's nobody there? So having that plan in place and thinking about it deliberately, even if you're, you know, way down the road in your landscape and your plan for management is what you're going to remove as opposed to what you're going to plant. Because realistically, you are the managers, even if you are not doing it yourself. And one of the things that Terry and I gave a presentation on at the Turf Conference was garden trends and what we're discovering and the data. And a part of it is pretty interesting, which is the generation that we are currently educating, or trying, are do it for me. And that also includes us as the hair gets gray and the, you know, long of tooth, if you're an animal. And that would be, you know, we still want it done, but we either don't want to do it or we can't do it anymore. So the DIFM is really important, but you're still the manager of that. And so if you're not engaged in that to begin with, you're going to come home from whatever you're doing during the day and discover that what you thought you had and wanted, you don't have anymore. So that's really an important piece of landscape management. So good design. can reduce the management significantly. And if you look at what really is considered the highest and the lowest management, managing a water thing or water in any form. So our little pond out here, our little tiny pond with our pondless waterfall, hasn't frozen yet this year because we've had a heater in it. It's down this far, so Anne has to drag hoses even in the middle of the winter. The turtles are in there. The plants that decided to put themselves into it, a la the cattails, are in there, and every year we have to rip them out. Managing an irrigation system. Irrigation is also water. Managing stormwater or runoff. We call it storm, but it should really be just runoff, right? Of any sort. Managing those rain gardens and those that bioretention and those bioswales. Managing the water in your bird bath. That's still water, right? If you want the birds, what? Oh, okay. In other words, I have to make stuff up.
No, just keep going.
All right. Turf is next. Now, turf is the highest, really high on the list of high inputs, depending on how you want to manage it. So if you really want the absolute perfect monoculture turf, it's a high input. If instead, if it's green and you mow it, and that's good enough, the management drops. So a big piece of this is the acceptability of what you've got to you, okay? Earth. So, and when we're talking earth, we're talking about that exposed soil stuff. So, you know, here's where we start talking slopes and soil type and cover and impact on that earth in terms of what it takes to keep it from going places it shouldn't, all right? Gravel, anybody deal with gravel as a surface besides me still? Yep, well, guess what? The gravel has worked its way down to, I don't know what's 16 feet under, but something. And so it's time for more. And it doesn't matter how slow you tell people to run up the driveway, all of a sudden there's gravel all over the front yard, right? Weeds, I don't mind the weeds in the gravel because it holds the gravel in place, but a lot of people mind that. Pavers with any sort of joint that is not a mortar joint. So we have sand, the polymeric sands and the new ones that are the joint fillers and sealers. Again, you know, great technology and great engineering has come up with some better ones, but it still is something that needs to be managed. And then, of course, there's that concrete stuff. This is going to be a real interesting year to see the reduction of management on concrete as it's heaving and breaking all over everything. And again, the management in place is one thing. Manage what you've got. The having to replace, repair, rebuild when damage has been done so you can manage it is a big piece of that management plan. You know, what are you going to accept? How bad are you going to let it get before you decide you're really going to have to fix something or change something? Okay, so we're looking at one of the classic grasscretes, the old grass pavers. You know, sounds like really a great idea to do this kind of thing in a situation where you have low volume traffic, vehicular traffic. It is a great idea. The pictures that get shown to all of us as we are thinking about converting a place or adding this are beautiful turf. You can just barely see the concrete, right? Well, let's think for a minute about soil volume, and I know Becky will talk about this more, but the soil volume in there, and as soil expands and shrinks, or as it gets hot or cold, all those edges that are surrounded by pavement are going to impact the root zone of those plants. So mostly what you get is weeds, if you get anything else. But again, it's green, if that's acceptable, as opposed to a solid concrete, all right? So here's the really big deal. And this, it was a day with my seniors who are working on a project on campus that is very, very important. which would be the landscape around the East Union, which is going to open on April 2nd because FFA, Career Development Event, is here on that day. So this would be, their client is the Vice Chancellor, who has said this shall be done. And I had to send them out today to look at the giant pink rock that has been there for 50 years in pretty much the exact same place. It's like, we didn't know there was a pink rock out there. They've only walked by it how many times? Yeah. So that's that's this, and we all do it. So a part of the real huge piece of management is you've got to actually immerse yourself in the space and the place. What do you have to manage? What do you need to manage? What do you want to manage? And then what can you change so that what you have and what you need and what you want are really all together? And that's going to change over time. And it should change over time as your landscape changes, as your family changes. That picture is old because that would be one of the tiny humans that is a grandchild about 2 years ago. He's now 5.
No, that's Brielle.
That's Brielle. It looks like Trent. It looks like Trent doing exactly, it's hers. But they all look like that. They're in their puffer coat and they're running all over stuff. Okay, so why bother planning? Why bother? Because, Mother Nature does this, plays that card whenever she feels like it. So you have a couple ways of thinking about the management in this. And the first is you anticipate everything is coming up daisies, right? It's going to be a day like today. Beautiful. There was sunshine. There was very little wind, comparatively speaking. The moon was gorgeous. The birds, the robins are back. The cardinals are doing the cardinally thing. It was perfect. Yeah, and then there's going to be Thursday, right? So again, a big piece of the management plan is, okay, this is what you really would love to have happen. What are you going to do if instead? So anybody in the flood zones, of course, or in the anticipated, yes, it's going to happen again, anticipating what will happen again, all right? And then you have to decide where's your middle ground. It's sort of like pH. If you're a plant, and you can kind of go, 6 to 8 in pH instead of just hanging right in there at exactly 7.1. You want a little bit of a swing space. That will make a big difference, okay? So we go back and forth on this, and in putting a management plan together, we go back and forth on this, as do most people who truly create a management plan. So you can plan by the season, because, we do live in a state where we have them. We're not entirely sure when one starts and when it stops now, but we do have them, right? So the seasons are constant. We have 4 of them. And many of the recommendations that you'll see, especially if you go broadly, looking at recommendations, regionally as an example, they're based on the seasonal data, precipitation and wind and all those things. It's seasonal, all right? It's also comparative from year to year. Well, geez, what happened last year? What happened this year? Who has snowdrops flowering? Ours are. How long have they been flowering? Yeah. So the pictures from last year of our snowdrops out here were February 3rd, last year. So that sounds pretty comparative to me, is we just think things were a little different, right? Now, the other thing, of course, is the very specific date, because we have gotten into this with some people we work with. They want a date. They want a date, not a window, for whatever we're going to do in the landscape. Yeah, no, can't do that, right? Can't even do that with houseplants. So, and the weather, of course, is very unpredictable. Your timing can be off if you have not planned for that swing or that kind of thing. Too early or too late doing things in management, either of those, either side of that can really cause issues with your landscape, either certainly immediate issues, but then potentially long-term issues. Some management is constant. You just got to do it. You just have to do some things in spite of the season or throughout the seasons. As an example, again, that water thing, that number 1 at the top, How many of you went out in our dry January when we always get the January 55, it was 64, and watered your evergreens? How many did it? Wins the prize, because you know what? They still need the water. They still need the water, right? Okay, and some management ignores the seasons. It just doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't. Not much, but some of it you really don't have to worry about. Concrete. The big thing now, right, is don't fall down again when it gets all icy. Yes? You can weigh in anytime. You.
Oh, yes, I agree.
So here's the other one. You plan by category. So seasons, you got 4, right? You got 4. Cedar Rapids, Iowa has 5. The 5th season is supposed to be entertainment, I guess. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's what they say the 5th season is. So plan by category. You can do it really simply. Your attention is focused on that one thing, right? You're zoning in, your laser vision on the one thing. You might not have all the categories to have to deal with. Your landscape may not include a water feature. It may not include irrigation. So you're going to think about water as a category a little differently. You might not have broadleaf evergreens or vines or raised beds, whatever it is. Turf. Might not have turf. Okay. It's easier to wrap your hands around it because, again, as you lay that plan out, you are focusing on one category of things to do. Easier to prioritize all that time we all have on the weekend, right? Because if it's by category, then you do, oh gosh, this weekend I'm going to do that. Yes, you can change those categories, and they do change. And what's in each category changes. And this is a real specific one because stuff dies, or you get new stuff, or you, again, in your landscape, you change your thinking about what you really want to do. Okay. So start on that. Yes?
Yes, yes.
Or
so I think how we've really decided to do this, because we do argue back and forth about which way
we negotiate.
Is you do it both ways. So by category, so turf, trees, herbaceous, shrubs, water.
Yep.
And do it by season. Because usually when you're managing those categories, you are going to do something differently in each season. So, and depending on what it is, it's going to change, per season. So some shrubs, you're going to have to prune in the spring, right after flowering. Other shrubs, you're going to have to prune in the fall or in the winter, depending on what they are. So setting your priorities, kind of keeping a journal, keeping a management plan is best to kind of help understand and remember where you're at. And know this is very true of both Kim and I, because we go after shiny objects quite frequently.
Look.
Know your time and know your capabilities.
Right.
So understanding that you need tree pruning and it's 10 feet, 20 feet off the ground, those may not be your capabilities. So you may need to have something like that hired out. So it's also going to depend on whether, last year, spring started June 1st last year?
Yeah.
This year it may start April 1st. So depending on what it is. So planning by both category and season actually gives you the best of both world. So
and that is really the way that we do all of it now, both for campus and probably for our own landscapes when we actually manage them. So if you take a look at this image in here, and we said plan this by category and by season, what do you see for categories to manage? Turf, shrubs, irrigation, annuals, so perennials, maybe stuffed back in there, it's a little hard to tell. So a tree. So there's a woody thing that wants to be a tree, right? So within every single thing in there, then you've got 5 or 6 categories. And then it's like, okay, what do you do with the annuals? Huh. What do you do with the tree? During when? It really does make it a way to focus your attention and be mindful of your own capability. Okay. Okay, so in order of the environment, or in order of the way really to think about these, and again, this is us as the way we think about it, which is an organizational thing. You start with the environment. We tend to not think of the landscape as a system. And to sort of think of environment as this, oh yeah, there is one out there. But the landscape itself is this incredibly beautiful, complex system that is interactive. Everything is interactive. So you do start with the soil. You got to start with the soil, because whether you're trying to keep the apron of your drive or your patio from sinking or heaving, or those plants from growing or dying, it is that soil and the slope of that soil. Whether it is too steep or not steep enough, whether it is so irregular that you cannot manage it, all those kinds of things with that. The water itself, we keep emphasizing water, woody trees, shrubs, and vines.
Yep, herbaceous perennials, you're definitely going to track those differently than your annuals. And then there's 2 kind of things to think about even now with herbaceous perennials. There's 2 schools of thought out there even now, depending on the season, is do you keep everything up for all the critters to live in, or do you take everything down to keep some of those critters not living in there, i.e. voles? So, there's lots of different things to think of and decide on how you're actually going to manage it. If you do have voles, then yes, I understand you're taking habitat out for some insects that could be wintering over within those herbaceous perennials. But do you really want voles digging every single thing up and eating all of the corms and roots and everything all winter long? So,
and this is a perfect year to look at it, because the vole damage that revealed itself after the snow finally melted is legend this year. It's really bad this year.
So, annuals, you're definitely going to handle those much differently than you are your herbaceous perennials. And turf, what are you going to do with your turf? Are you actually going to have a nice stand of turf, or do you care just as long as it's green? Wildlife, some people want to attract wildlife. They're going to plant for wildlife. Some of them want to keep wildlife out. So, and then your hardscape and constructed elements, those are something that you have to do all the time and make sure that they're staying kept up. So,
and a big piece of that in a city like Lincoln, where plowing the street is a little bit of an issue, you're still responsible for your sidewalks, right? And hoping people don't fall down. And then of course there's whatever your de-icer is going to affect your soil and your plants and your pets. And so again, there's one simple example of the systematic sorts of things that can happen. Okay, so what kind of soil do you have? Becky will do a really good job on this. Clay, sand, silt, loam. What do we have here? Is it soil? Yeah, but it varies all over the state. I mean, honestly, if you go to Scottsbluff, that weird sodic soil that they have is so strange. In the center of the state, it's this funky, you water it and it's so wet like this that you think you don't need to put any more down, and 2 minutes later it's so dry that you haven't actually wetted the roots of anything. But you got to know that, all right?
Well, Scottsbluff said Huey. I don't know what Huey is. But then they said hay. So
Huey Lewis and we're not singing, Scottsbluff. You can sing. Let's hear you. Yeah. So improving the structure of that soil. Terry mentioned that, the soil in Ecuador, and those of you who have worked in our backyard farmer garden, and those of you in greater Nebraska who have done the soil amendment correctly, there's nothing like it. We talk about the word tilth, and describe to somebody what tilth is. I was like, what the heck is that word? What is that word? What do you think that word is? It's this, isn't it? It's this. It's this. It's this. Yeah. Compaction is the big one. That's the big killer of plants, and it's the absolute have to have 98% compacted medium dry density under pavement or it's going someplace, right? Using compost and using compost correctly. We're getting more and more questions about, do I have to actually let my compost or can I just use that hot manure? Sure. Other popular additives, many of them, worm castings, coffee grounds, what can go into the compost, fertilizers. What are you using for fertilizer, if anything? And cover crops. So
cover crops are really the biggest thing right now. We actually did a digging deeper on cover crops. So if you're interested in going back and looking at about a 20-minute video from Backyard Farmer last year, we had 2 of our experts within our department really talk about using cover crops within more of a garden setting. But cover crops are being used on acres and acres and acres and really worked into true agronomic rotations even now. So there's cover crop research being done out here on campus too, looking at even cattle grazing on it. So really cover crops are something that's really a very green way to add that fertilizer and protect that soil. So
exactly. And besides which, it looks really cool in the winter, usually.
But we do insist on a soil test.
Yes. So, yes. Soil test.
Soil test.
Soil test.
So definitely take a soil test. I actually got an email just even yesterday. Somebody, how much fertilizer do I have to put on my asparagus bed? I have about a half acre of asparagus. I was like, did you even take a soil test? Nope. Well, that's the first thing you have to do. I'm not going to recommend any kind of fertilizer until you know that you actually need it. So.
And that will, again, vary from year to year, depending on the crop that you're growing.
So as we work our way through these, we're going to start giving you some resources, and then you'll be able to go back in and get a lot of these. So you'll be able to see these. A lot of them are links or ECs that are out of your Master Gardener handbook. So.
And again, what you're after is not what you see on that picture. So there's an erosion fence of sorts, and there's a little cover of sorts. But again, even the restoration of soils that have been damaged in some way by construction, going through the winter months is a really big issue to be able to get those covered back up again.
Just to let all the counties know, if you guys have questions, you can have my phone with me too. So I've got my chat here. So if you guys have questions, please just put it in the chat box.
So these they'll be able to go to, right?
Yep,
you don't want to go to them.
No, we don't want to go to them.
Okay. Okay, so slope. What degree and direction? And again, it's fascinating that people don't really understand rise and run and slope. Do not understand it, in spite of the fact that we live with it all the time. What is the stability of that, its angle of repose of the soil itself, and the accessibility that you need to be able to do whatever it is you need to do to manage the landscape that you want. It's really difficult to spend a lot of time, with one leg like this and the other one pegging along downhill while you're trying to get something done. So in terms of understanding your slope, truly the best thing you can do is walk it and look at it from multiple directions. And then again, that's do you look or do you see? Imagine yourself doing whatever you think it is you need to do on that slope, including the hard to manage, which is the flat ones, because there's where you end up with issues with standing water in the basement, those kinds of things. Neighboring slopes. So here's where we get into water law, and here's where we get into the Hatfields and the McCoys, because what is coming to you from them is a real issue, or can be, and what you do to them can be a real issue. Big time issue. And again, that's something people don't understand. Well, I can change this over here. Yeah, no, you can't. You cannot do that legally. Specifically, you match contours at the property line. You don't dump more water on their property than is already going. You don't change the direction of that water because that impacts their property, okay? And you certainly don't want this to happen because you are not managing that environment well, which is classic for the way of water. It's going to cut itself down. It's going to erode. This is an actual situation that's up in Ashland, and this is way before flood. So this is 10 years ago. And by the time they actually realized the damage that had been done, they were about 15 feet deep in that location to fix that. Okay, so water's the next one. How much water do you have and how much do you get? So we talk about average rainfall, right? Well, what does that really mean? Because as landscape people, what do we usually want? That perfect slow inch, usually on a Thursday night, so it's dried out by Saturday, so you can work in the garden, right? Perfect. Yeah, no, we don't get that, do we? Especially now, we're getting high intensity, and I mean, our storms are becoming more violent. So a lot more of it, a lot faster. And that's what really causes issues in the landscape. And it's the drainage and the runoff, the location, the quality of that water. This is where things like rain gardens and bioswales and choosing the right plants are really, really essential. So we protect, we direct, we preserve.
Yeah, quality is also, people have to remember, if you are collecting water, whether you're doing it in a rain garden, the soil is actually going to help clean that water off your roof if you're collecting it off your roof. But you cannot drink that water off your roof if you're collecting it in a rain barrel. And you don't want to put that water on your vegetable gardens. Because what's on your roof? Beyond the asphalt, bird poop, raccoon poop, squirrel poop, whatever's been up on your
dead turkey vulture.
So, you really need to remember what's been up there, and you can water out of that rain barrel with, to your herbaceous plants, but really don't
shrubs.
Use it for anything that's going to be edible.
If you're going to eat it, don't use the water out of your rain barrel. And people don't know that. They really don't. They think they're doing such a great, they're collecting the water, they're repurposing the water, but yeah, don't put your fingers in your mouth.
So Lincoln County wants to know if you can explain the difference between rise and slope.
Well, sure. So when we talk about slope, we talk about two different dimensions. The first is the run, which is the horizontal, and the second is the rise, which is the vertical. So, and it's always a proportion. So the longer the run and the shorter the rise, the more gradual the slope. So when we talk about a run to rise of 4-to-1, that is, you're running 4 feet for every 1 foot up. So 3 feet, 2 feet, that's the way we think about that.
So rise is a dimension.
Right, they're both dimensions. Yeah.
Is the
percentage. Right. So as an example, let me give you a better one. 3-to-1 slope is really not manageable in terms of mowing. 4-to-1 becomes manageable. 5-to-1 is considered better. 20-to-1 is universal accessibility. So you think about accessibility for people who are differently abled. It's a 20-to-1. It's a percent. So you think about a 4-to-1 in percent, it's 25%. That's kind of a big deal. Okay.
That's NASCAR.
NASCAR. So, okay.
Just to let you know that.
So did that help, Lincoln? You guys understand it? I'm teaching construction right now in grading and drainage and slope. Yeah, they've been outside, they've been out in front. They've stood and looked. It's like, what's this rise to run stuff? Well, horizontal, vertical, a triangle. That's your slope. Think about that. That hypotenuse, that's your slope. Okay?
So the last thing, when it comes to water and kind of having to manage anything that you input or have that happens, especially on the solid surfaces, make sure that you're managing them correctly. If you go out and either mow or put down fertilizer on your turf and some of that gets on your concrete and then it rains, where are those inputs going to go? They're going to go down your driveway, they're going to go into the gutters, and then they're going to go down into the sewer system, and then they're going to end up in Dead Man's Run, and then they'll end up in
Holmes Lake or Salt Creek
or Salt Creek, or they'll end up in the Missouri, and then they'll end up in the Mississippi, and then they'll end up in
Ecuador.
Louisiana. So, you really need to make sure that you're very cognizant of everything within your landscape. So
that also includes, it's actually not, I don't know how it is in other communities, but it's actually not legal to blow your leaves into the gutter or blow your grass clippings into the gutter.
Or put your snow in the street.
Or put your snow in the street. Not legal to do that. Yep.
We have a faculty member who we found out was doing leaves in the street.
Dennis.
We told him.
Okay, so bioswales, rain gardens, and ponds, of course, are wonderful, wonderful water management sorts of things. Ponds, bioswale, you know what a bioswale is, right? What's a bioswale? It's a ditch with plants in it instead of concrete, basically, and it's still slope. It's still slope. It's got sides, and it's so people also don't understand that a bioswale slopes in two directions. You've got the side slopes, but you're still going from uphill to downhill on a gradual slope, all right? So then our rain gardens are, I mean, it's a great popular, as it should be, addition to a good landscape. Multiple different ways to build rain gardens. We have a lot of good resources on that. We're really happy with ours because ours is about as low input as you can get. Up in the backyard farmer garden. Ponds, year-round. And you've got to have at least about a 60% shade on the surface of the water, and ideally water movement to keep that algae down. So people, you know, the calls we get are, all right, I have a pond in full sun and it's all green all the time and it just smells gross. And well, it's the combination of not enough shade, not enough movement, and probably too many fish for the fertilizer from the fish poop in that. And fish and critters absolutely add to the management. Our turtles out there, people love the turtles. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the turtles get their worms. And they don't go out and hunt them down. We feed them. So are you going to use chemicals to keep the water clear enough, or are you going to do best practices for the management? So that's the algae, the weed growth, the unwanted aquatic critters, snakes.
Snakes are not allowed in the courtyard. Mm-hmm. So, but our pond is not 60% shade cover.
No.
We had lots of algae when it was first installed.
Mm-hmm.
We did use chemicals at first. The chemicals were all fish safe. And then we actually found something that works. It's an electronic device that actually is inserted into the water line. So
it's a copper ion exchanger.
It gets plugged in as soon as that water reaches 55 degrees, because that's when algae starts blooming. Mm-hmm. And then it gets unplugged when the fall finally hits and the water gets back down to 55 degrees. So, but it stays plugged in all summer long, and that actually controls our algae, and it is fish and turtle safe. But so, and not really using any chemicals anymore. But you know, it was about $300, and we have to replace the copper ion every year, and that little guy's about $100. So it's not. Ponds are not inexpensive. People think they can dig a hole and
build
fill
a
it
pond
with water and call it good, but that is not the case normally.
Well, and we did a digging last year also on mosquitoes as the flooding, and of course, if you don't have enough water movement and you don't have, I mean, you're going to have mosquito issues with the pond as well. So, and that of course is our pond in the courtyard, which is, I mean, it is an issue, but it's also one worth it. But you have to make that decision from a management standpoint, or hire somebody to do it for you and hope to high heaven they can come when you need them.
And that they understand it.
Well, right. And that, again, you think about the aquatic formulations. If you are going to go a chemical route, or you have to because there is something that is an invasive species that has come in, you've got to make sure that whatever you're using is not going to be one of those inputs that will damage everything else. Irrigation systems, what kind? Hose and sprinklers on the end. Underground system of some sort, soaker hoses, any combination of those things. But the real thing is how many people really know how much water they're putting down and where is that water actually going. And that, again, is a do you look or do you see, and how do you know how to figure that out, as well as the when. So I am not a fan of automatic. I understand why, because in August, hardly anybody wants to drag a hose in August, unless you're hot, and then you're going to spend more time watering yourself, right? But anything you want to say about what we've done up here for irrigation and why?
So, yeah, so several years ago, we talked about putting irrigation in. We didn't really know how to do it. So since the Backyard Farmer garden started, even at Vasco, it's all been hand done. So we've moved hoses around. We had quick couplers in the ground, so it was easy to get a hose close to where we needed it to be. But, it was something that had to be done. It had to be done while, personnel were here. So we were watering at 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon when it was 100 degrees outside and the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour, because that was the only choice we had. So we actually had somebody come, an irrigation company, and they actually came and designed and actually sited the right kinds of heads for us. So our heads or our irrigation system is actually under all of the walkways. So we don't have to worry about digging it up when we turn over the soil or we remove plants or dig up plants. And then the heads pop up 12 inches. And then the sprinkler itself has a very, very big water droplet, and it has a timer. So it comes on at 4 o'clock in the morning. It runs for 2 hours. It's done at 6. And it has a rain gauge on it too. So if it does happen to rain, then it won't even turn on. So just to let you know, you do need to double check all of that kind of stuff, because we did have one section that would never turn itself on. Well, we realized that the other section was hitting the rain sensor, so then it kept thinking that it was raining. So make sure that you double check all that stuff. But if you design an irrigation system correctly, it will benefit you, because we are now no longer watering at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We don't have to worry about it getting blown into the street. I mean, it's done at 6 o'clock, and it literally has all day for that water to dry on all the leaves within the whole garden. So, it depends on what you want to do. Again, it's another management thing. We had to blow out the pipes this last fall, and we have to, charge it up in the spring and, fix heads and all those kinds of things. But
and then, meet code, because code is a really big deal with most irrigation cities, or in systems in most cities, and code has changed. So, you hire a good irrigation company to do it, or when you go buy the parts, if you're going to do it yourself, you have to understand the code to do it right. And the other thing people forget about is you design an irrigation system for a landscape at a snapshot in time, and then the landscape changes. And that's actually one of the things that we went back and forth on a little bit, because the Vasco garden, the plants were chosen for drought resistance and low water use. So, the key there is to make sure that as we're watering everything else in that zone, we water those differently than we water the plants that need more irrigation. That's really important.
so you can conserve water, and you definitely need to think, and there's lots of options for you to choose This list is about as complete as you possibly can get. Hardwood mulch is probably what most people use. Straw, a lot of people use straw because it breaks down much quicker within vegetable gardens and stuff, or annual beds. We collect leaves in the fall and use those in annual beds. Pine needles.
You can buy them by the bale. But
Some people have them here. It's more of a southern thing. Grass clippings or something, but you definitely need to know where's your turf, where are those grass clippings coming from, and what was put on them. So if they were fertilized or had a herbicide put on them, you may want to rethink. Again, cover crops, really big, important thing. And you can use inorganic stuff. Do we recommend that? Usually no, but depending on certain things, you will want, if you're putting some rock down for a little bioswale or to direct some water somewhere, you're want to put some landscape fabric underneath that. Otherwise, your rocks are going to keep going into your soil. So
we have a new rock edge along our courtyard on the south side of PS, and that was literally because of water and plant sciences. So, and then you're not mowing up against the edge of the building. So, that's again a reason to do something a little different. Terry mentioned the grass clippings. One of the mistakes people make when they mulch with grass clippings is too thick. And then they A, stink, B, they rot, and C, they don't really break down right. And then you've got a mess on your hands. So again, the whole point of mulch is you're covering the earth. You're covering. People also ask us, well, geez, I hate these pine needles. Can I rake them up and plant something under there? Heaven forbid. Why wouldn't you just let them be the cover? That's the cover there.
All right, so we're going to stop here for a break. It is 7:37, so we'll say 7:40. Come back at 7:55. And this is where counties can get their hands-on activity, and that's what we'll come back to do.
Up. Is that just custom?
Just a second. All right, can you hear me now? I hope you can hear me. Okay, so yes, you can hear me. Sorry. So we're going to get rid of Slido for tonight because it's not working right with Zoom. So what I want you to do is we're going to work on our handout, our hands-on activity right now. And if I can get my group to kind of wait just a minute. First, I want the counties to type in, what does a plant tag tell you? So what kind of management and plant information are you going to get out of this? And then what I want you to do is check out those handouts that we gave you. And then Kim and I will let you guys work in groups look it over, to take about 2-3 minutes to look at all the different plant tags that are on the handouts that you got. And then we're going to ask a handful of questions when it comes about it. So
and again, if you think about what we're asking you to do, the majority of you are here for that grow a plant thing, right? So starting with the create the management plan, and then here we are in go buy a plant season. And that's the tags. And what we're really asking you to think about is, do the tags give you enough information to know how to manage the plant you think you're going to buy because it looks so beautiful? And I think she printed on both sides. So, yeah.
all right. So here comes the pop quiz to see if you guys can actually decipher what's on the plant tags and labels. We did get a handful of things that counties replied back: growing zones, light needs, those kinds of things. I'm going to assume you or hope that you read the last page of the handout because that pretty much told you all that stuff. So the first question is on your forsythia, your weekend forsythia from Home Depot Garden Club. So one of the management things is you need to know when some things bloom and when you need to prune stuff back. So reading this label for the forsythia, and please counties type this in too, when does this forsythia bloom? And then knowing this, what would be your management plan for that plant as to when the pruning time would be? I can't walk much closer to the mic. It's like literally right on top of me. So we got blooming in the spring, pruned after it blooms. We got some head shaking here. Blooms in the spring, prune after blooming from both Gage and Hall County. So excellent. I'm going to assume most of y'all knew that already.
So
But
define after spring, after bloom. Defines after bloom. Day after? Week after?
how long do you have?
How long after? Does it tell you
Week?
that? Can you prune it in July? What happens if you do? Lose the buds. So anything that blooms in the prune after blooming in spring, there's one of those timing windows before it sets the flower buds for the next season.
And that's usually about a month.
It's usually about a month. Now
So
you can prune vegetative growth if you need to, but what do you have to know? What parts are vegetative as opposed to the flower buds?
okay, so on these the two Campbell's labels that we have, how much information do you get from those? The sweet potato vine, and then there was one from UNL Hort Club.
They're the ones
There's a
that have
jalapeno pepper,
the yellow
the
looking.
yellow label, viburnum.
Viburnum nudum, earthshade, and
Sweet potato vine, marguerite.
sweet potato vine.
How much information are you getting from those plant labels? Oh, pruning when the saw is sharp.
Yeah. When your tools are sharp and you have the time, that's the old saw from arborists.
So we're getting a couple counties saying Hall and Scotts Bluff and Gage are saying there's no information on these. Maybe we should talk to our Campbell's representative back in the corner here and tell him to get more info on those labels. But how many times have you bought something and that was the label that you got and that was all the information that you got?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's an annual. So here, knowing that it's an annual, you know, you're pretty much going to know what it is and it's not going to make that big a difference.
Right.
Oh,
right.
So we got a
It's a good attempt at a recovery, Tim.
yeah, we got a recovery saying if you are buying these and this is what you're getting from your local nursery, check the signage. Most of us all have a smartphone, so take a picture of that smartphone and that's going to have more of that information on it. So,
and I will tell you, and this is not picking on Campbell's, but I will tell you that one of the issues with signs that are a stand sign in any garden center or box store, they're limited in size, so you're going to get some of the basic information, but again, you may not get what you really need to manage it effectively, or people move those signs around. So you got to match what you think you're looking at with what you think you're reading on those.
But the last page kind of just lays out some of the, I blew up a couple of the labels and gave you, but most plant labels will give you most of the information that you need to know about those plants and how to care for them when they go back into your landscape and how you're going to manage them throughout their life, whether it be, you know, a container that you're just putting pansies in and you're going to rip those out in May and put something different in, or, you know, a tulip tree that you're going to plant and have, you know, in your backyard for the next 50 years. So
And what are two critical pieces of information that are rarely, if ever, on any plant tag for a plant that you're purchasing? Scientific name, because most people don't speak scientific name. Critical for a management plan.
So
Pests and diseases. Watch for, susceptibility to, keep your eye on. And I can't imagine that most of you in here have not wandered out into your landscape and thought, oh my gosh, didn't know the magnolia would get magnolia scale. What is that stuff? And how do I manage that? So, and that usually is not on a plant tag. So that becomes asking for additional information or doing the sleuthing yourself on it.
Oh, so one of the other comments is chemicals used on the plant, native or non-native. So that's also a couple things. People are really wanting to know whether it's a native plant or a non-native or an introduced plant.
And again, the native or adapted, or the controversy over if it's a variety or a cultivar of a native plant, is it still native? We won't go there. Yes, Tim.
Another thing to keep in mind is understanding the interaction of that zone. So yes, it's zone 5 to 7. But understand. You want me to start over?
Yes.
So another thing to understand is to have a good feel for what zone 5 looks like. So the tag says zone 5 to 9, and as a nursery professional, if I want to call myself that, we get tags all the time that say zone 5 to 9, but they come from Oregon. And so full sun in zone whatever in Oregon is different than full sun in Nebraska. So understanding that component of your landscape environment is critical to understanding if that plant is going to work there. Will it take full sun in afternoon in July in Nebraska? It may not. It may take full sun in the afternoon in Oregon and Washington, but not in Nebraska. So understand your plants and how they behave. Rather, I mean, the zone is important, but understand what that implication is for your plant.
And closer to home, Scotts Bluff, are you a little different zone than we are, even though we're in the same zone? I think so. As we're talking about our edible landscapes, the plants we teach are from zones 4 to 6 around the world. Big difference in zone 4 to 6 from east to west and around the globe.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to remind you, and you know, we touched about on this when, you know, all of you, wherever you're at in your training for Master Gardener training, you'll touch on this at one point or another, is that understanding and learning your nomenclature, but we also talked about learning your families. And when you know those families and you know where those plants fall within those families, that family whole management system will work within that family. So knowing what plant it is and knowing what family it's going to come from is also a very good way to learn and understand what kind of management that plant's going to need.
It's a good first start, you know, because some of the big families are like holy buckets worth. But again, if it's Cactaceae, I wonder if it's going to live in that rain garden that one of you wants to build, right? I think not.
So I hope this kind of helped a little bit and kind of got you looking at things. So we'll keep going now.
Okay, so if we do go by the categories, and again, one of the things in the landscape and in the landscape system is to really consider what has the greatest long-term impact on the success of that landscape. And that really should be where you probably should put your priority from a management standpoint. What are the bones? So what are the trees and shrubs? How the heck are you going to know how to manage it if you do not know what it is, right? Age and condition, what was the quality when it was planted? And again, that's oftentimes very difficult if you're in an older neighborhood, you bought it and the plants were in place. There's really no way of knowing that, short of how healthy is it now that you've gotten a hold of it. What were the management impacts from previous situations, construction in Lincoln, aloe coming through the neighborhood as an example, any of those kinds of things. And it could be as simple as, gosh, somebody was, it was delivery and they backed all over everything several times. You really can't tell until your turf dies or your landscape dies in the wheel tracks in there.
Or you bought a house with a tree that had a 6-inch high ring
Wall.
around it,
Right,
and then they filled it up with soil.
right, exactly. Those kinds of things. Or a tree died, they had it removed, they removed the stump, and what the heck is the hole in the backyard?
Or why do I always get these mushrooms?
Why do I always get these mushrooms and what can I kill them with? That's the next one. Yeah, no, don't do that. So location, what is the location of the trees and shrubs in your landscape? And again, from a design standpoint, there are principles we follow. And then there are the landscapes that make you love them. And there's two ways to look at that. But what is the contribution of those plants, both to your current landscape, and again, thinking for the planning, what you have in mind for the longer run, for as long as you're living there or those kinds of things. So is it yours to manage or is it theirs? The shade that I get from the southwest side is from a pin oak that's 65 feet away in my neighbor's yard. So if that pin oak comes down, all of a sudden what I have is a nice west shade is gone and not a thing I can do about it. Okay. Impact on or of other categories on these things. Turf, change in irrigation system, change in the neighbor's drainage that's going to impact the livelihood, the quality of the plants that you have, the companion plantings that you have and how they are zoned and how the interaction of the roots and the uptake of water and nutrients and shade patterns really affects their quality as well, and attitude. And this is yours. So it's your landscape. Do you not mind the fact that your blue spruce has 3 limbs left because of X? Do you really not mind that the chokecherry has now threatened to take over your entire subdivision? Or if you do, you're going to have to think about the management of that differently. Okay? All right. So weigh in any old time in there.
I'm weighing in.
Okay. So manage what it is for where it is. That's really the big thing to think about here. And I look at new landscapes being planted. And again, we do this. This is not just landscape companies. Too close to what? The sidewalk, the garage, the driveway, the house, too close to something. And then, or, oh gosh, the tag said, and the plant did. And those are two different things, right? So all of a sudden you've got a plant that's been sheared off where it's not contributing or you have to take it out.
And I especially like, there's one I drive by every day on Normal. It was a big blue spruce and they planted it right on the corner of a sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole quarter section is cut out because it went way over the sidewalk.
Right, right. So
those plant tags tell you what that plant should look like when it's fully mature.
Mm-hmm.
So get your tape measure out.
Read the tag. And then err on the side of snow removal and vehicle traffic and those kinds of things. My pruning class pruned the sidewalk north of the parking lot again. We prune it every year. You can see where Landscape Services has to drop a wheel off. Every year the pruning on it is, wait a minute, they pruned it to where they thought it would work. It's like, you forgot about the fact that it didn't stop growing. It's going to put on 18 inches. You didn't prune enough off of it to actually make it down the sidewalk. And again, that's an easy mistake to make, but if you think about the planning on it, okay, what's going to happen in the spring when it breaks dormancy? Okay. Compaction and soil damage, we've talked about that as a major thing, major over tree roots, major thing. The trees that have been saved in our construction project here on campus, it's laughable to think that they're actually going to survive. They're not going to die immediately. That would be too convenient for the contractor. Watering?
So watering, we talked about this when we were kind of talking about water too, but especially watering the bones of your landscape, those trees and shrubs, low and slow, is definitely the best way to go. Even if you do have an irrigation system, putting a hose out there and letting it run. And remember, drought makes a difference. Wind makes a difference. We live on the Great Plains. We live within a wind tunnel. And you always know when the seasons are changing because it's really windy here. That pulls a lot of water out of your plants. So make sure that you're watching those plants. Those plants will tell you when they need to be watered. And that competition, as Kim talked about, you're planting kind of underneath some of those trees. If you're putting some kind of living mulch underneath, vinca or hostas or what have
Sedges.
you. Sedges. Those are going to compete. Well, what do you think is going to compete first, and what do you think is going to get first rights to that water? Those big things, those trees, those tree roots, they're going to take the water first. So you definitely need to make sure that when there is some competition, that you're watching those smaller things and making sure that you're giving them that supplemental water. Nutrients. How many people put a lot of nutrients in their landscape? A lot. Yeah. Do you really need to? If you're putting mulch down, it's creating compost.
Compost.
Beyond turf, if you really want nice turf, maybe some vegetable gardens would need some, but most landscapes don't need a lot of nutrients added to it at all.
And there you go with the soil test and looking and seeing and knowing what the plant is supposed to look like. So again, a whole different situation if you're in a high pH soil in western Nebraska compared to Omaha.
Mhm.
Big difference. Mulching after watering is really important. We put 2 to 3 inches. It really depends. And one of the best practices for mulching is don't. Instead, use plant cover. So your plants themselves can really reduce the amount of mulching you need to do in the recharging if you plant densely. That's Brian Kinghorn and I gave a talk, and Brian has said over and over again that mulch is an industry now. For heaven's sake, and it's an industry. No mulch against the trunks or stems. No volcanoes. And watch the formation of what we call mulch pizzas, which is the mulch. If it's a really finely ground mulch, it actually compacts itself into a layer, and you can you pick it. I mean, basically no water or nutrients will get through it. It's a mulch pizza. I bought a couple bags the other day to, mulch some mud in the frontage, and it's like, oh my goodness, I just laid concrete, only it just happens to be cedar. So, I mean, perfect example of let it be where it is. This is our gumdrop tree, which is the silver linden in the Arboretum east of the dairy store. Such a beautiful tree. A management plan, had it been developed for this tree, and again, this is resource specific. So you think about all of the things that Landscape Services has to do on 500 plus acres. This tree was never pruned properly. And so what is now had to have, it's included bark. There's a place where you can walk under branches that have gone up. Still a beautiful contributor to the landscape, but not probably the way that it would be had it been managed from day one. Irrigation. So this is really, irrigation is so hard for people to understand and do properly. And we talked about a little bit about the automatic system, but this is really, I think, a pretty darn good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Rule of thumb.
So this really helps you, especially on newly established trees and shrubs. We would probably never, actually, I'm going to say we never recommend planting 2, 3, 4, 5-inch caliper trees.
1.5 inches is about as big as we really like to recommend.
So, but
Mhm.
we do see them go into landscapes quite frequently. But this is how much water. So this is going to give you kind of an idea. These plants need a lot of water. So, you know, a 1-inch caliper tree, it's going to take 1.5 years for that root zone to establish. And, you know, it's going to need about 1.5 gallons applied for a newly established tree.
And that's every single time you water. That's not once a week or once every 10 days. So
Yep.
you can see what happens.
So
here.
you have to do it once or twice for daily for the first 2 weeks, every 2 or 3 days for the next 12 weeks, and then weekly until established. And it's probably gonna take 1.5 years for it to be established. So, and look at how long, if you planted a 6-inch caliper tree, it's going to take 9 years for that tree to be established. That means that tree is going to sit there and literally do nothing for the next 9 years. So what's the point? So yeah, it's going to be big when it goes in, but
and your budget isn't going to be big
So-
anymore. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so what do you have to prune? And this again is an aesthetic. So this is the landscape systems approach and the aesthetic and personal preference. But if I could take the pruning shears away from pretty much 90% of the population, I would do it. Pruning is truly an art, and it takes a long time to do it properly. And more is not better. More is not better for the health of the shrub unless it is dead, diseased, dying, or a safety hazard. It's not better. So if you're pruning your boxwood, as an example, or another hedge type plant 3 or 4 times a year, every single time you're making that pruning cut, you are removing the photosynthetic material from that plant. Okay.
and opening wounds.
And opening wounds, absolutely. So sometimes you can prune to manage disease and pests, but not always. One of the big ones, of course, is canker. If you can prune canker out, you must prune canker out. We do have elderberry borer in this end of the state. I don't know if it's hit central and western Nebraska yet, or if elderberry borer has decided that's too far. But we just pruned out our black lace elderberry, and significant borer damage in the old canes on that. Got to get them out of there. And again, there's one of those overwintering things. Aesthetics is size and form. A really good arborist will pretty much work in the trees, not the shrubs, but will also tell you can turn any tree into any form. Landscape architect and landscape designer would say, pick the form first and then manage for it. You do want to produce strong plants with your pruning. You can influence fruiting by pruning. And again, this is one of those, what category are you in? What season are you in? What is the timing of making those pruning cuts?
There's actually new research out there that's actually pushing the pruning time back into the summer, early summer.
Mhm.
So May and June instead of kind of now. It has been for years. This is the time of year to start pruning. Fruit trees are still an exception.
Right.
But normally we talked about pruning February,
Dormancy.
March, April, while in the dormant season. And there's actually new research that has come out that actually pushes you back further. However, if you are having to prune for shape or safety because of crossing limbs or something like that, now would be the time to do that, because it's hard to see it when it's full of foliage.
And part of the reason for that change we still don't prune when we in leaf on or leaf off. So you think about June, by then leaves and foliage and branches have fully extended. And then what that actually can do, depending on the species, is it stimulates stronger growth or changes bloom cycle. So, which is really, it's kind of fun to prune in the summer if you can see what you're doing. Same thing, what do you need to fertilize? 28 years in the house we're in, and I have fertilized nothing. Maybe the tomatoes once in a while. Nothing. I just compost. It looks fine. There's nothing. I never use fertilizer. But again, it is what needs what and when. So if your landscape has been designed independent of thinking of that management plan, what if you have something that really is a high dose fertilizer and you need the acid next to something that is a low dose fertilizer, if any at all, or needs the alkaline or needs a weird, micronutrient of some. You're going to be standing out there all the time, scratching your head, figuring out what needs the fertilizer. So this is a look and see again, what is going to show you, if you know your landscape, just like your peeps, you've got kids, you've got grandkids, you've got a spouse or a significant other. When they look a little off, they probably need something, right? Same thing with your plants. Same thing with the plants.
But
so, go ahead.
You need to get that soil test.
Yeah. Are you sensing a little repetition here? Yeah. So abiotic stress is a big one. We get this on Backyard all the time. It's like, well, it's turning a color. What should I fertilize it with? No, don't. So this is a classic example. That's a maple. This is mid-July. That is not a plant in need of fertilizer.
Or is it going into fall color?
Is it going into fall color? And why is it going into fall color? Because of A, when it was planted, B, where it was planted, C, the condition it was in when it was planted, and D, the management. Fertilizer is not going to bring that tree out of that. Okay, planting techniques. And again, if you are fortunate enough to A, have space, or B, make space for planting something new this spring or fall, which you should all do. So roots. Create the big good shoots. This is an inspection, and this ties directly to the management. If it's a poor quality plant to begin with, you're going to have to do a lot more management to bring it into good health. The planting, you want to talk planting, or we know this by now, right? We all know. Wide, shallow, slightly higher than the hole in soils that don't drain well. This is not going to be true in other parts of the state. Even or so, but it's give those roots the room they need. Staking if it's needed, only for one growing season. And again, we're staking the root ball in the ground. We're not tying the tree down. We're staking the root ball in so it doesn't blow over.
And it does need to move.
Yeah.
I mean, your tree has to move. When it's staked, it has to move. It has to move without wind, because that's how those roots are going to get established.
Right. Exactly. Mulching, we've already talked about. If you can extend the mulch beds beyond the drip line, that's ideal. And again, if that's the initial and then you go back in with plant cover, that's better yet. Pruning, put it in the right place to begin with. And again, it's the dead, diseased, dying shape of something. Okay. Yeah, they do. They grow. They do not read the book. And so many of the plants, especially a dwarf or a small plant, a lot of those dwarf or small plants, the word is not dwarf, it's dwarf-er. It's little-er. It's not little. So keep that in mind on those. Choose wisely for new plants. We all get so excited when the new stuff comes out, All America selections, annuals, thank heavens that didn't work. But if you're investing in something else, know the environment. This goes back to do you look, do you see? All those things we talked about. Deliberately do the 360 for that, where you think you're going to put those plants. And that is look from all directions as opposed to just the classic direction. Can you really get around it? If you're going to mow, can you still get the mower through? Those kinds of things.
And 360 is a ball.
Yeah.
Not flat 360.
Look from
so
above
look up.
and down. Right. All around those landscapes. We don't do that. We don't do that enough. Okay. Good design principles, which I think we talk about in March or sometime.
Depending on where you're at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, look at this. Isn't that just a really excellent example of I have no idea. I don't know what it was.
It looks like a crepe myrtle.
It looks like a crepe myrtle, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't in Atlanta. So I don't know what that is. Okay. Resources again.
You see that we have soil test again? Do you think
Again.
we're trying to tell you something?
You know, in soil tests, you can do that. You can buy the kit yourself, or you can, and you really can. You can get some basic information on it.
Yeah, and we Becky has done that, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about that when we do soils for online. But Becky has gone to Menards and purchased, the soil test, and she compared. We had a real soil test done, and they were pretty comparable.
Right.
And I think it was about $10.
Right.
So
a different level of depth. But again, if you're really, really going to go deep in a soil test, you have to know what you're asking for too. So another category, this is herbaceous. Same thing. You start with what do you already have? What do you want, especially annuals? Age and condition, same thing. Quality when planted. Previous management impacts. We tend to buy herbaceous plants, perennials, it's small, it's easy to dig a hole, not very well, or put that plant in a place where it really is not going to be pleased with its environment. Same thing, contribution. Digging into the root system of that other category. This is one of the big laments. People want to plant something under the canopy or against the canopy of an older plant. Terry already mentioned it. The big guy is going to take what it wants first. You're going to have to give more inputs to those new things if indeed they're even going to succeed. Okay? You really have to look at shade patterns for those things too. Shade patterns are so important. Same thing in terms of impacts, attitude. If they aren't where you want them after a season or two, can you go ahead and move them? Are they movable? Even some of our herbaceous perennials, they really resent being relocated. They don't really want to live in that container to begin with, and they sure as heck don't want to have to pick up and move the next year.
And this is kind of where some of that native, introduced, non-natives, a lot of us live in a city. We live in construction soil that is not good. You know what? A lot of those native grasses and stuff, they are native to a prairie where somebody didn't have a bulldozer and they came down and dug all that stuff up and brought all that icky clay up. They're not going to like it. So you're going to have to amend your soil, or you're going to have to go with something else that's going to like it more. Also wanted to say, we talked about buying small trees. Buying small herbaceous plants is sometimes not a bad idea either. Don't buy the gallon thing that costs $25. Go buy the little 32 that costs you $5. It's going to take a couple years for it to kind of get going, but it's going to be a little bit easier to maintain. It's a lot less money. You can buy 5 to 1 and fill in that space a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and if you're going to do that, that's a budget saver, but it's not a resource. It's not a management saver, because you may in fact have to do more watering because
True.
of that little root ball, or more weed control in the interim, or plant with annuals in between and make sure they don't outcompete the other ones. Okay. And again, you can move some, but not all. So same thing. Berms, depressions, raised beds. Just because you have it doesn't mean you should. So understanding these words, again, we talk native. I like native plants a lot. We are urban environment, really an urban environment. And some of the adapted species are going to do much better. You have to pay attention to its potential for becoming poorly behaved. And that's becoming more and more of an issue as our zone has changed. We're seeing things that are dying out that like it cooler, and things that are really happy coming north from their southern locations. So pay attention to the Invasive Species Council information. If you start to see some things that are escaping, that's a part of your management plan. That's the look and see. We did not think, and I have to buy Justin Everson 16 donuts for this one. we did not think that lacebark elm, beautiful lacebark elm, was going to seed itself up here. It sets its seed in the fall. We've never seen it. Our one beautiful lacebark elm in our garden down there, it's like, what are these Siberian? They're lacebark. They're lacebark elm. So be really careful with what you are purchasing. Ask the right questions. Same thing. So, understand, this is another one we really haven't talked about, which is signal plants. And signal plants, if you understand and know your landscape and what your plants are supposed to be doing when, watch the signals for, all right, are they really droughty? Or is it just it's 109 degrees and it's a west-facing sun and the wind is blowing and they wilt at 4? If that turgor, that pressure builds back up overnight and they snap out of it and they're fine, but if that continues to happen or they don't come out of it. So identify in your landscape the plants that are going to give you some sort of a signal on something environmentally is not right. We need to manage this differently.
Or even insects.
Insects, same thing. Yeah.
Some will attract insects first.
Roses.
Roses.
Japanese beetles. Grapes. Japanese beetles. Apples. Japanese beetles. 300 species. Japanese beetles. Okay, same thing, nutrients. Is it nutrient issue, a pest, or a disease? Is it herbicide damage? And again, lots of conversation and lots of both confusion and frustration over herbicide drift and damage in landscapes. So again, we live in an environment where what comes in from somebody else is likely going to be more of an issue than what you're dealing with yourself. And some plants you can manage out of that, and others you simply cannot manage out of it. So, but one of the big things from a management standpoint is establishing what you're willing to accept for perfection or lack thereof. What's your threshold of, I don't like the way that looks, I need to do something about it? Weed control, Fitbit, work those arms, work those quads, work something with it. But be careful about shallow-rooted plants. Be careful, especially if you're working under trees, or, some of our trees are so shallow-rooted, you're going to do a lot of damage if you're using a hoe. You're going to have to get down there and pull the darn things. So,
again, mulch, more and more people are really going to the live cover mulch, but you're going to need something to get all that stuff established. So, buying those little 32s of Vinca, putting some mulch down, within 2 or 3 years, that Vinca is going to be covered and you're not going to have to put mulch down again. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the mulch pizzas, we talked about all that. We didn't talk about cocoa mulch. That's really kind of a popular thing. If you do have a dog, dogs will eat cocoa mulch and it will make them sick because they cannot eat chocolate. So it smells good, it looks pretty, but it is expensive here. And if you do have a dog, then that's probably something that you want to stay away from.
Cypress mulch, avoid it if at all possible, because cypress mulch is actually harvested from old growth cypress and they are not regenerating. So don't. Natives, a lot of our natives, and again, you think about where so many of our beautiful prairie plants grow with those great root systems and enough space, they do not want an organic mulch. They don't want it. So you watch the watering in the initial establishment, and then you do not mulch them. You're gonna cause rotting in the crown if you do that. So
usually you're companion planting them anyway with grasses and forbs and all that kind of stuff. So
resources again. Turf.
So everyone will probably get a turf lesson eventually within, especially your initial year. But you have to know what kind of turf you have to start with, especially if you're moving into a new home. Do you have warm season or cool season? Most people have cool season, but more and more people are actually going to warm season. So people are planting buffalo grass. It actually likes it better out west. So Scotts Bluff, Cheyenne County, and all you would, buffalo grass works a little bit better out there. We get a little too much rain over here, but there are some people who get away with it. So,
and of course, the real issue with turf is if you do have warm season, which is the buffalo grass in the picture, again, in an urban environment, the cool seasons come into the warm season. And most people who want truly the prairie, the native, do not want fescue and bluegrass in their warm season. So then it's a management issue. And the timing on that is essential and critical, and that is what our good turf guys are for. Again, top dressing, mulching, aerating, all those good things, mowing. When you get the information that we give on when to put down pre-emerge, post-emerge, if you're going to do that, or how low to go and when to mow, follow it. Those guys do the research.
yeah, they're actually looking at, because of some of the climate change too, the pre-emergent for crabgrass control is actually getting pushed back
earlier.
So yeah, putting it down earlier.
Right. So again, the whole issue of managing turf, water if you wish. Most turf is over irrigated, majorly over irrigated. And even last summer in the drought, I think Bill said he watered twice on his fescue lawn for the entire summer. So, 3 times a week at an hour each. No, don't do it. Okay. Aeration, good idea, but not always. Thickening, and when to do that and how to do that is going to be one of a good stand is going to be your best method of controlling weeds. Pest disease is insects. Again, what's your threshold? And if you're controlling Japanese beetles and everything else, because the best way to control them is not the Japanese beetles, pay attention to when to control those grubs. Turf, lots of resources on this one. Oh, so I have to mention this because this is way cool. There's a new Weeds of the Great Plains book. And yes, there's a new one. The old ones are for sale for $10.
If there's any left.
If there's any left. The new ones are really good because what they did, they're larger, more pages. They have actually pulled out of there some of the plants that we said, what are you talking about? This is not a weed. This is a beautiful prairie plant or something. And then they have added in some other weeds that were eliminated. I don't know that I even know the price yet. You have to buy them from the Department of Ag. It's the only place you can get them. So you can call them or you can go online or go, if you're in town, you can go down and get one. But it's great. I have one on my desk.
So wildlife. Again, we kind of talked about this earlier, but decide, do you want wildlife? So are you actually going to attract wildlife depending on what you're planting, or do you want to keep it all out?
And remember that insects are considered wildlife. People don't like to think that way, but yeah, they are.
You do have to know what you have. And Dennis has a very nice website now that IDs at, and that's link is up there. So he even has all the snakes of Nebraska on there, so you can go and find whatever snake you want. But know what your landscape's going to have. Again, some of those plants are going to be kind of signal plants, whether you got aphids that are coming in or what have you. But and again, we talked about this. This is good IPM practices. What is the threshold that you're going to live with? If you have tomatoes or vegetables and you just have, a couple little holes in it, do you really care? If it's completely stripped, then maybe you're going to care and you're going to have to replant those green beans or something. But what is your threshold?
one of the issues with timing on this and thinking about how to manage it is with really difficult wildlife damage, rabbit damage, deer damage, even vole damage. People forget from season to season when that damage begins to occur. So they do not do the exclusion or the protection in time. They do it after the damage has already started. So again, this is one of those, pay attention, take your notes. You've got rabbits. Well, maybe you did have foxes last year or coyotes or something that ate them. Maybe not this year. They may have moved on. If you get that stripping or that, debarking of a tree, there you go with, can you actually manage that tree back into good health, or should you cut your losses and cut that tree? It's a little different from rabbit damage when they've clipped all your shrubs off, but you're likely to, you're not going to see the flowering. You're not going to see those kinds of things. So know in advance. And Dennis, again, does, the methods of managing are best practices for these things.
So we have a question from Dakota. When do you do crabgrass control? Normally it's always been, when your soil temp is 55 degrees, and that was usually pushing the end of April, 1st of May. But now it's moving back. So those soil temperatures are actually warming up quicker than they used to. So I was just talking to Rock about this the other day, and there's research out there that's showing that it could potentially be
2
the
weeks.
15th of April now that you need to put that first application of crabgrass render down.
So again, you got to pay attention to people that are saying this is when you do those things. Otherwise, you're wasting money, resources, and you're putting on a chemical you don't need.
And this is research coming out of a couple universities further east than us.
Right.
But, he's going to start tracking
Looking
that
at it
more.
here.
So definitely keep track of, on backyard when some of the turf guys talk, or, within the Master Gardener program, or even on turf.unl.edu. They'll definitely send out information. So,
I should say one more thing about wildlife attracting it. And remember that one of the things they need is water. And one of the questions we get asked is, all right, I want X, but I don't want Y. Good luck with that, truly. You're going to get the raccoons if you've left out water for the birds, so you just need to be aware of that and then determine if it's enough of an issue, what are you going to do about it? And no, you cannot trap and relocate. So designing, so here we go, and this is the I want to do what, starting with the fact that you now have really determined what you want to do for that management plan. What do you want to do for the management plan?
So knowing your environment, again, we've talked about this. There are microclimates, so you definitely need to remember those too. You're going to need to know your soil type. And again, this is all usually taught in the design class, so we're going to probably go through a little bit quickly since we're kind of running out of time here. But knowing your water, knowing where that water is running. Is it running from your neighbor? Is it running through your backyard? What's hot? What's cold? What are your shade patterns? You have to know all that stuff. Moving in, I actually did what I teach when I moved into my new house. I waited a whole year. I didn't plant anything. I had a couple containers. That was it. I waited a whole year and I tracked everything and figured out where the sun pattern was. And I actually had to take some trees down in order to get what I wanted to do too.
So, and again, we will talk design intent. What do you want to do? But look at this word. This is right there at the top. What's your design intent? So if you really want a Victorian knot garden, you want that knot garden, then either figure out how much pruning you want to do or how many shrubs you want to buy or perennials that are going to give you that shape without having you have to do the management of those things. It's not as difficult as it seems if you start with how are you going to take care of it as opposed to I want to buy that beautiful new plant.
Okay.
Questions?
So, questions.
Or wrap up.
We'll take questions. I have my chat box online so we can do questions.
And remember, the specificity of this is entire majors and entire professions. We could go plant by plant through the plant ID classes that I teach and give you the management on every single plant.
So
And it would
thank you,
take
Scotts
15
Bluff.
weeks and a lot of money.
They're good in Scotts Bluff.
They're good in Scotts Bluff. No storms coming in.
Any questions here? So the question is, if you're mulching with grass clippings, do you have to let them dry out first?
So if you're putting down an inch or less, you don't have to. But usually it's like a big old wad and a clod out of the back of your mower. Yeah, so then yes, you do need to let them dry out, but you also can't just let them sit in a pile because they'll steam and they'll stink and so you're gonna have to flip them just like you do compost and then pick them up again and put them down. When I mulch with grass clippings, which I do rarely because I don't bag, I actually go get my son's grass clippings, but I take the bag and immediately shake out a layer like that and let them dry in place.
I think the only time I use my bag on my mower is to pick up leaves in
Me
the
too.
fall.
Yeah, and that's after I've run over them 16,000 times.
So,
Mm-hmm.
any other questions, either online or in class? Yeah, go ahead. So the question is if you're watering trees that haven't been watered for a while, is it dangerous to let that water pool?
It depends answer, which is what's your soil and what is the condition of the tree. So this is where knowing how deep the water profile is in the soil is really, really important. And if it's dried down for a great depth, if you let the water pool, as long as it's not in a low spot where it's going to be truly standing water, unless it's a tree or a shrub that will tolerate standing water, that's fine because it will soak into the soil.
And who planted it, if it still has some of its soil on the root ball, and
you can have a really major difference in composition between the soil and the root mass and the surrounding soil. And oftentimes loss of new trees is because water gets applied either not to the ball, it's to the surrounding soil, and the ball, especially if it's really, really congested root system, actually will not take that water up.
So we have a question online. It says, will plant needles alter the pH of soils?
So we get this question a lot. If you have needles from spruce or fir or pine, will the pH be altered? No. No, slightly, but not enough to make any difference. No, you can't grow blueberries. Yeah, no, not enough to make a big difference.
Yeah. And we did plant blueberries underneath
our pines.
And
yeah, no,
they don't really do very well.
Yeah, no, not enough.
So.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Anything else?
Anything else? Online or in the classroom?
Go forth.
All
Enjoy
right.
tomorrow
Thank
before
you.
the temperature tanks.